Let's bring on board Abneesh Roy, Executive Director at Nuvama Institutional Equities. We also have with us K. Ramakrishnan, MD, South Asia Worldpanel Division at Kantar, joining in on the show right now. Gentlemen, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking with us today on ET Now. Mr. Ramakrishnan, if I could really start off with you, what's really happening with rural recovery? Because since post-COVID, one has seen a K-shaped recovery where rural has really lagged. Are there indications on ground which make you believe that rural can make a comeback?
Yeah, so when you look at it from an FMCG lens, there's one thing to remember that the first half of last year was atta was being given free by most governments in India. So to that extent, there was a little bit of muting in the numbers reported for FMCG. So, but if you remove atta and see, there is definitely a recovery, yes, and the growth in rural has overtaken the growth in urban in the last 2-3 months. I mean, before that, urban was leading the show last year, rural has. But that said, I wouldn't say it's completely out of the woods as yet because the growth is just a little above, let's say, household growth rate, which means that we are keeping up with population and maybe marginally above that. Yes, there are some green shoots. Parts of India received very good rainfall last year, but there are parts which had deficit as well. And a lot depends on how the rabi crop shapes up and things like that. So the thing about the events of last week are more to do with the fact that the FMCG business or the industry itself is a long-term steady state kind of business. So that is more to do with it than anything else. But rural recovery, we are seeing early green shoots, but I will not jump to the conclusion that it's out of the woods as yet. That would be my draw on the rural market.
Abneesh, hi, morning. What is your own sense? I mean, given the exposure that most of these FMCG plays have to, the rural end of the market, I mean, as high as 50 to 55 odd percent in cases like Imami, Dabur at about 45%, Colgate Britannia also equaling in on that same number. Is it fair to assume that there are at least green shoots visible now when it comes to the rural end of the market?
Think so. If you see in terms of Nielsen, also rural areas saw 7.6% growth, which was ahead of the urban. And after many quarters, this has happened. Second, if you see in terms of commentary in Q4 and further commentary also, the commentary is turning positive. Two caveats here, two things to watch out will be essentially what will be the spatial distribution of monsoon, because monsoon is supposed to be good this year because of the La Nina effect. But we also need to see whether the key high population areas, say of UP, Bihar, Bengal, Jharkhand, etc., those see what kind of rainfall, whether it is too high or too low, that also needs to be seen, which could get masked in a overall pan-India number. These 4-5 states are very high population states, and the per capita consumption of FMCG in these states is also lower. Second thing which we'll watch out is now elections are over. So we need to see the price hikes which are coming in telecom, because at the lower end of the rural consumption, any increase in the telecom charges will have a negative bearing on spends on FMCG. So that we need to see whether it will be 10%, 20%, what's the kind of number. That is one more monitorable. But as of now, it seems local players as a competition is also dipping in many categories because it's anniversarizing and companies are taking proactive steps. Second is price hikes will come back for the sector starting in Q2. Some companies have already taken price hike. So that should also help in terms of the overall sales growth. So the worst seems behind, but keeping fingers crossed.
Okay, Ramakrishnan, I just wanted to understand from you as well what the outlook is now when it comes to the rural thrust. Do you think that, of course, as we are waiting the portfolio allocations, that there will be a lot more populist measures announced this time around? And do you think that when it comes to the rural sector, we are likely to see a pickup, a further pickup?
So in that scenario, your guess is as good as mine about the measures that are likely to be announced. But I would seem to think that there would be more continuity than otherwise, even from a rural perspective. Because if you look at what are the things that kind of trigger growth of consumption in rural, there's one, monsoon, which we have spoken about, I've spoken about, and the other guest has spoken about it as well. Then the second thing is harvest, which is in fact a function of monsoon. Beyond that, if you see, the other things are like non-farm income, which is like, let's say, the non-farm employment, the Rozgar Yojana and things like that, which are already at a state which are comfortable. And the support pricing also is the fourth factor. So last two factors, definitely I would seem to think that there would be a kind of continuity, which will kind of be in a way to see if the rural can grow faster than what it already is. That said, what we do definitely expect is that in this quarter also, it would be muted. It would be better than urban for sure, but it will still be possibly just a little above growth in population or growth in household numbers, etc. But in the second half of the year, depending upon which way the monsoon swings, which at this moment we're all having fingers crossed that it would be positive, it's very likely that we'll see a recovery closer towards the end of the year, a very strong recovery in rural. But at the moment, it is still muted. That is the view that we hold.
Fair enough. Perhaps a recovery by the end of the year. Would you like to add to that, Abneesh? And I'd also like to get in your thoughts. I know I'm asking another question that's not related to rural recovery, but the valuation picture as well. How are you looking at the valuation stacking up for some of these FMCG companies? Do you believe it's justified?
So coming to first part of the question, yes, we do expect that the spends on the NREGS Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, the MSP hikes should be higher than what we have seen in the past few years, given the developments at the government level. It's a coalition government. In the past, we have seen that whenever that happens, spends on the rural do increase. Please note that in the coming months, there are 3-4 key state elections also. So we do expect that farm subsidy, farm support programs will see a higher outlay rather than just a pure play in capex infra spends. I think it will be more balanced, and that will be positive for the rural consumption. Coming to valuation, if you see some of the stocks, still the valuation comfort is quite high. So in fact, Hindustan Unilever, if you see 1 year, 2 year performance is still quite muted. But in their case, also the pricing growth will come back from Q2. And in terms of the rural, they again have a very high exposure to rural, almost 35%. So HUL clearly valuation comfort is there. I will say that it's true also for Britannia, Dabur, etc. So yes, Asian Paint again, if you see, although numbers have been quite decent, because of high base margins and because of the Birla Opus, that risk which investors see, valuation comfort in Asian Paints, Berger Paint is again very high. So I will say that Asian Paints, Berger Paints, Hindustan Unilever, Britannia, etc., the valuation comfort is high. And next 1 year, I think in these 4 stocks, good money can be made. In rest of the stocks, it will be more of a compounding of earnings rather than a PE re-rating at this stage.
Abneesh, do you think a lot of the sporadic outperformance that we've seen in the past week from some of the FMCG players is also a function of stark underperformance, which has, lasted a very long time, and at a time when, the markets are at an all-time high, it's just sector participation and rotation that one is seeing?
Yeah, partly you're right. Sector rotation keeps happening, and clearly there have been developments at the government level. Rains, if you see, even in Mumbai, it's ahead by 2-3 days. Overall, most forecasts are saying it will be 106-107% of the normal in terms of rains. So I will say yes, definitely sector rotation happens due to a reason, and this sector has seen definitely a lot of FIIs and to an extent DIs also. There is a lesser portfolio allocation here, so that catch up will happen within the sector. Again, if you see, many stocks have done exceedingly well and are at all-time high. Varun Beverages, Pidilite, United Breweries, United Spirits, a lot of these stocks have done quite well in spite of say HUL ITC is not doing well. So laggards have been more in terms of the large caps. So HUL ITC, Asian Paints, which I highlighted, these have been the laggards. So these could see catch up over a 1 year time frame. In the current context, we like HUL, we like Dabur, we like Asian Paints also from a longer term perspective. So yes, it's a catch up, plus some of the fundamentals are improving.
Ramakrishnan, where do you stand when it comes to this in light of the fact that we have seen quite a bit of volatility when it comes to the commodity prices, particularly even for food inflation? What is it that you're expecting by way of pricing strategy for most of the companies?
Yeah, so we look at things from the basket of the rural consumer much more than market or primaries or anything like that. So when you look at the basket of the rural consumer, it's already small in the sense that the number of items that get into the basket is less than what it is in urban. So to that extent, the volatility is not substantial. However, whenever there is a lot of liquidity in terms of money availability, let's say during elections or anything like that, the money doesn't necessarily go towards FMCG, and it goes towards the other things. But like Abneesh said earlier, there is a link between what happens to the telecom pricing and FMCG, because that is one area where spends have distinctly gone towards for the rural consumers. But coming to last week and how the performances have been, and therefore, etc., it is. I think it is more a statement of the fact that this sector is a long-term, fundamentally strong sector. It is there for a very, very long time, rather than any instant volatilities based on inputs. That is what it kind of underscores for me if I look at data from last week.
Okay, finally then, Abneesh, since we have you with us, give us a sense as to which are some of the stocks that are looking attractive, where the valuations as well are adding up, and whether or not you believe that the kind of heady run-up that we witnessed last week, at least in the FMCG companies, is going to play out for the long haul or not.
No, we remain positive. In our view, this is a start of the sector coming back because of the reasons which I mentioned. So there are two kinds of stocks currently. Some stocks are doing quite well, are at a 52-week high or an all-time high, but those companies are also doing well. For example, United Breweries, Godrej Consumer, Colgate, Marico, etc. are doing well. Pidilite, those are doing well. So there it may not be PE re-rating, but there are companies, for example, like HUL, Asian Paints, Britannia, Dabur, where I would say it will be a mix of PE re-rating gradually, plus the earnings compounding will also continue. So if I take all that into consideration, currently I will say HUL provides a lot of valuation comfort. ITC also provides, by the way, but in case of ITC, we would wait for the agri growth to come back, and cigarette volume growth currently is a bit muted. That also needs to come back for the re-rating to happen. So I will say HUL, Asian Paints, etc. The valuation comfort is high, but triggers I would say will be more of post Q1. But rest of the companies which are at 52-week high, those are currently seeing good times. So Varun Beverages, for example, will see a very strong quarter because of the strong monsoon. One last point will be in Q1, because of the election, there are a lot of restrictions in terms of dry days and excise officials moving to the election duty. So that will have a one-off impact in terms of the liquor stocks like United Spirits, UBL, etc. But that's a one-off. That's not something which is a fundamental thing in my view.
Appreciate your time, Ramakrishnan, as well as Abneesh. Thank you for sharing with us your thoughts on where the FMCG sector is headed.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.